Marcus had served as a royal guard for 12 years, and in all that time he had never questioned his loyalty to King Edward. The castle walls had become his home, the corridors his daily path, and protecting the royal family his sacred duty. Every morning, he would stand at attention outside the throne room, watching as nobles came and went, their whispered conversations echoing through the marble halls. On this particular autumn morning, something felt different. The air carried an unusual tension, and Marcus noticed how Queen Camilla's ladies-in-waiting seemed more secretive than usual. They would stop talking whenever he approached, their eyes darting nervously before they hurried away. Marcus had always been observant, a skill that had served him well in his position. But today that skill was telling him something was wrong. Queen Camilla had married King Edward 3 years ago, bringing with her a charm that had captivated the court. She was beautiful, intelligent, and seemed to genuinely care for the kingdom. The people loved her, and the king was completely devoted to his new wife. Marcus had witnessed their wedding day, had seen the joy in King Edward's eyes, and had believed, like everyone else, that this marriage would bring prosperity to the realm. But lately, Marcus had begun to notice small things that troubled him. Late-night meetings in the Queen's chambers that weren't on any official schedule. Strangers visiting the castle who didn't go through proper channels. Documents being passed in shadowy corners when they thought no one was watching. Each incident alone might have been innocent, but together they painted a picture that made Marcus increasingly uncomfortable. The king had been ill recently. Nothing serious according to the royal physician, just a persistent weakness that left him tired and unable to focus on his duties for long periods. Queen Camilla had stepped in to help with many of his responsibilities, which seemed natural and caring. She would bring him his meals personally, tend to his needs, and handle correspondence that might tire him. Everyone praised her devotion, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about the king's condition. That evening, as Marcus completed his rounds, he decided to walk past the Queen's chambers one more time. The corridor was dimly lit by flickering torches, and most of the castle had settled into the quiet rhythm of night. As he approached, he heard voices coming from behind the heavy wooden door. This wasn't unusual, but the tone of the conversation made him pause. He pressed himself against the wall, staying in the shadows, and listened carefully. Queen Camilla's voice was clear and authoritative, nothing like the gentle tone she used when speaking to the king or addressing the court. She was giving instructions to someone, her words precise and urgent. Marcus couldn't make out everything, but he heard enough to understand that plans were being made, plans that involved the king's continued illness. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, and Marcus remained hidden the entire time, his heart pounding as the implications of what he was hearing began to sink in. When the voices finally stopped, he heard footsteps approaching the door. He quickly moved away, finding a different route back to his quarters, his mind racing with questions and fears. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Marcus lay in his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of what he had overheard. Could Queen Camilla really be plotting against her own husband? The idea seemed impossible, yet the evidence was beginning to mount. The king's mysterious illness, the secret meetings, the careful way the queen had positioned herself to handle more and more of the kingdom's affairs. Marcus knew he needed to be careful. Accusations against the queen would not be taken lightly, especially without solid proof. If he was wrong, his career would be over, and he might face charges of treason. But if he was right and he did nothing, the consequences could be far worse. King Edward was a good ruler, beloved by his people, and the kingdom had flourished under his reign. If something happened to him, especially if his own wife was involved, the stability of the entire realm could be at risk. The next morning brought no clarity, only more questions. Marcus watched as Queen Camilla moved through her daily routine, greeting courtiers with her usual grace, tending to charitable matters, and visiting the king in his chambers. To everyone else, she appeared to be the perfect queen, devoted and caring. But Marcus now saw something different in her eyes, a coldness that seemed to emerge when she thought no one was looking. During the afternoon, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He approached Sir Thomas, the head of the royal guard and his most trusted mentor. Sir Thomas had served the crown for 30 years and had always been known for his wisdom and discretion. If anyone could help Marcus navigate this dangerous situation, it would be him. They met in the castle's old armory, a place where they could speak without fear of being overheard. Marcus carefully explained his observations and concerns, watching as Sir Thomas's expression grew increasingly grave. The older knight listened without interruption, his weathered face showing the weight of years spent protecting the royal family. When Marcus finished speaking, Sir Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he spoke, his voice heavy with concern. He admitted that he too had noticed unusual activities around the castle, things that had made him uneasy, but that he had dismissed as coincidence. Together, they began to piece together a pattern that was more disturbing than either had imagined alone. They agreed that they needed more evidence before taking any action. Accusations of this magnitude required absolute certainty, and they would need to be extremely careful in their investigation. The Queen was intelligent and well-connected, and if she suspected that someone was watching her, she might accelerate whatever plans she had in motion. As the sun set over the castle, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had sworn an oath to protect the king, and now that oath would be tested in ways he had never imagined. The comfortable certainty of his daily routine was gone, replaced by a dangerous game where the stakes were nothing less than the life of his sovereign and the future of the kingdom. The investigation began the very next day, though it had to be conducted with extreme caution. Marcus and Sir Thomas developed a system of subtle signals and carefully planned their surveillance to avoid detection. They knew that Queen Camilla was intelligent and observant, and any unusual behavior from the guards might alert her to their suspicions. Marcus volunteered for additional night shifts, claiming he needed the extra pay to support his aging mother in the village. This gave him legitimate reasons to be in areas of the castle where he might observe the Queen's activities without raising questions. Sir Thomas, meanwhile, began reviewing guard schedules and duty rosters, looking for patterns in when the Queen's mysterious meetings occurred. Within a week, they had established that the Queen's secret activities followed a predictable schedule. Every third night after the castle had settled and most of the staff had retired, visitors would arrive through a little-used entrance near the castle's herb gardens. These visitors never appeared on any official guest lists, and they always left before dawn. Marcus managed to position himself where he could observe these arrivals without being seen. The visitors were an interesting mix. Some appeared to be merchants, others looked like minor nobles from distant regions, and a few had the bearing of soldiers or mercenaries. What united them was their secretive manner, and the fact that they all carried themselves with the confidence of people involved in important business. Marcus began to recognize faces, noting that several of the same individuals returned multiple times. During one of these late-night observations, Marcus witnessed something that chilled him to the bone. One of the regular visitors, a thin man with a distinctive scar across his left cheek, handed Queen Camilla a small vial filled with clear liquid. The Queen examined it carefully in the torchlight, nodded her approval, and slipped it into the folds of her dress. The exchange was brief, but unmistakably significant. Marcus had seen enough poison cases during his years of service to recognize the signs. The king's mysterious illness, the careful way the Queen personally brought him his meals, and now this secret exchange of what appeared to be some kind of substance. The pieces were falling into place in a way that made Marcus feel sick with dread. He reported this observation to Sir Thomas the following day, and they both agreed that they needed to act quickly. However, they also knew that direct confrontation would be disastrous without more evidence. They decided to focus on documenting everything they could, while also trying to find a way to protect the king without alerting the Queen to their knowledge. Sir Thomas used his authority to make subtle changes to the guard rotations, ensuring that loyal and observant guards were always positioned near the king's chambers. He also arranged for Marcus to be assigned to meal duties, giving him opportunities to observe the Queen's interactions with the king's food and drink. They couldn't prevent the Queen from bringing meals to her husband without arousing suspicion, but they could watch and document her actions. The breakthrough came during the second week of their investigation. Marcus was positioned near the king's chambers when Queen Camilla arrived with the king's evening meal. She had dismissed the usual servants, claiming she wanted to care for her husband personally. Through a crack in the door, Marcus watched as she carefully added drops from a small vial to the king's wine before presenting it to him with a loving smile. "King Edward, Trusting and grateful for his wife's attention, drank the wine without hesitation. Within minutes, he appeared drowsy and complained of feeling weak. The queen expressed concern and suggested he rest, helping him to bed with what appeared to be genuine care. But Marcus had seen the truth, and it made his blood run cold. After the queen left, Marcus waited until he was sure she had returned to her own chambers before slipping into the king's room. King Edward was already asleep, but his breathing was labored and his color was poor. Marcus carefully collected the wine cup, noting that a small amount of liquid remained in the bottom. This evidence would be crucial, but he needed to be extremely careful about how it was handled. Sir Thomas arranged for the wine to be tested by Brother Benedict, the monastery's herbalist who had served the castle for many years. Benedict was trustworthy and knowledgeable about both healing herbs and dangerous substances. When the results came back 2 days later, they confirmed Marcus's worst fears. The wine contained a slow-acting poison that would gradually weaken the victim over time, eventually causing organ failure that would appear to be natural illness. Armed with this evidence, Marcus and Sir Thomas faced their most difficult decision yet. They now had proof of the queen's treachery, but they still needed to determine the full scope of her plot. Who were her accomplices? What was her ultimate goal? Was she planning to rule as regent if the king died, or did she intend to place someone else on the throne? They decided to continue their surveillance while also taking steps to protect the king. Sir Thomas arranged for trusted guards to always be present when the queen visited her husband, using the excuse of increased security due to reports of unrest in neighboring kingdoms. They also convinced the king's physician to recommend that His Majesty take his meals in the Great Hall more often, surrounded by courtiers, making it harder for the queen to poison his food undetected. Meanwhile, Marcus expanded his nighttime observations, following some of the queen's mysterious visitors when they left the castle. This dangerous task revealed that several of them were meeting with representatives from Valdoria, a neighboring kingdom that had long coveted their fertile lands and strategic ports. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a plot to kill the king, but potentially to hand the kingdom over to foreign enemies. As Marcus gathered this intelligence, he began to understand the true scope of Queen Camilla's betrayal. She hadn't just married King Edward for love or even personal ambition. She had been planted as an agent of Valdoria, sent to weaken the kingdom from within and prepare for conquest. Her marriage to the king had been part of a long-term strategy to gain access to the castle, the court, and ultimately the throne itself. The weight of this knowledge pressed heavily on Marcus's shoulders. Every day that passed without action meant another day that the king's life was in danger, and the kingdom moved closer to falling into enemy hands. But he also knew that moving too quickly or without sufficient evidence could result in failure, and potentially his own death. Queen Camilla had proven herself to be cunning and ruthless, and she would not hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatened her plans. As the investigation entered its 3rd week, Marcus and Sir Thomas began to plan their next move. They had evidence of the poisoning and strong suspicions about the broader conspiracy, but they needed to find a way to expose the plot without giving the queen an opportunity to escape or accelerate her timeline. The fate of the kingdom now rested in their hands, and they knew that their next actions would determine whether King Edward lived or died, and whether their homeland remained free or fell under foreign control. The plan that Marcus and Sir Thomas developed was risky, but necessary. They decided to gather the remaining evidence they needed, while simultaneously preparing to protect the king and expose the conspiracy. The timing would be crucial, as they suspected that Queen Camilla was preparing to accelerate her plans. The king's condition had been worsening, despite their efforts to limit his exposure to the poison, and they feared that she might soon attempt a final, fatal dose. Marcus volunteered for the most dangerous part of their operation. He would infiltrate one of the queen's secret meetings by disguising himself as one of her regular contacts. Sir Thomas had identified a merchant named Willem, who had been visiting the castle regularly but had recently stopped coming. Through careful investigation, they learned that Willem had died of fever in a distant town, but news of his death had not yet reached the castle. Marcus would take his place at the next scheduled meeting. The disguise required careful preparation. Marcus studied Willem's appearance based on descriptions from castle staff who had interacted with him. He practiced the man's distinctive accent and mannerisms, and Sir Thomas helped him acquire appropriate merchant clothing and documentation. They even crafted a believable story about delayed shipments and difficult travel conditions to explain any differences in behavior that the Queen might notice. The night of the meeting arrived, with a cold autumn rain that provided perfect cover for Marcus's deception. He approached the castle through the same hidden entrance that the other conspirators used, his heart pounding as he prepared to come face to face with the woman who was slowly murdering his king. The weight of his sword beneath his merchant's cloak provided some comfort, though he knew that violence would only be a last resort. Queen Camilla received him in a small chamber that Marcus had never seen before, hidden behind what appeared to be a solid wall in the castle's lower levels. The secret room was simply furnished but contained maps, documents, and correspondence that made the scope of the conspiracy immediately apparent. Marcus quickly scanned what he could see while maintaining his character as the merchant Willem. The queen was even more beautiful and composed than usual, but in the dim candlelight of the secret chamber, Marcus could see the cold calculation in her eyes that she hid so well in public. She spoke to him as Willem with familiar efficiency, clearly expecting a routine report and pickup of supplies. Marcus played his part carefully, using the information he had gathered about Willem's previous activities to maintain the deception. During their conversation, Queen Camilla revealed details that confirmed Marcus's worst fears. She spoke casually about the king's declining health, mentioning that the process was taking longer than expected, but that the final phase would begin soon. She referenced promises made to Lord Aldrich of Valdoria about the kingdom's defenses and strategic resources, confirming that this was indeed a foreign plot designed to weaken their homeland for conquest. Most chilling of all, the Queen discussed plans for what would happen after King Edward's death. She intended to rule as regent, claiming that the king had privately expressed concerns about potential heirs and had asked her to maintain stability until the succession could be properly determined. This would give her time to systematically weaken the kingdom's defenses and prepare for Valdoria's invasion, which was apparently planned for the following spring. Marcus maintained his composure throughout the meeting, but internally he was horrified by the casual way Queen Camilla discussed the destruction of everything he had sworn to protect. She handed him a package containing more poison, along with instructions for its use and timing. She explained that the king would receive increasingly larger doses over the next week, building to a final amount that would cause what appeared to be a sudden heart attack or stroke. As the meeting concluded, Marcus realized that he had learned more than enough to expose the conspiracy, but he also understood that time had run out for gradual action. The Queen was planning to kill King Edward within days, and there would be no opportunity for a careful, measured response. He and Sir Thomas would need to act immediately, despite the risks involved. Marcus left the secret chamber with the poison and detailed instructions, playing his role as Willem until the very end. The Queen seemed satisfied with the meeting and showed no signs of suspicion. As he made his way back through the castle's hidden passages, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever before. The lives of King Edward and potentially thousands of citizens now depended on the actions he and Sir Thomas would take in the next few hours. He found Sir Thomas waiting in the armory, along with 3 other guards they had carefully selected for their loyalty and discretion. Marcus quickly briefed them on what he had learned, showing them the poison and the written instructions Queen Camilla had provided. The evidence was now overwhelming and undeniable, but they all understood that exposing the plot would require careful execution to be successful. Sir Thomas had spent the evening preparing their own plan of action. They would need to simultaneously secure the king's safety, gather additional evidence from the Queen's secret chamber, and prevent her from escaping or destroying proof of her crimes. They also needed to be prepared for the possibility that she had other allies within the castle who might try to help her or eliminate witnesses. The group spent the rest of the night finalizing their strategy. They would move at dawn, when the castle was just beginning to stir, but most people were still in their chambers. Sir Thomas would personally guard the king and prevent any access by Queen Camilla or her servants. Marcus would lead 2 guards to secure the secret chamber and gather all the documents and evidence they could find. The 3rd guard would watch the castle's exits to prevent escape. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the castle windows, Marcus felt a mixture of fear and determination. Everything they had worked for over the past weeks would be decided in the next few hours. The conspiracy they had uncovered was more extensive and dangerous than they had initially imagined. But they finally had the evidence and opportunity to stop it. The success of their mission would depend not only on their courage and preparation, but also on their ability to present the evidence in a way that would convince the court and prevent Queen Camilla from manipulating the situation to her advantage. She had proven herself to be exceptionally cunning and persuasive. And even with solid evidence against her, she might find ways to escape justice or turn the situation to her benefit. Marcus checked his weapons one final time and reviewed the layout of the secret chamber in his mind. Within the hour, they would either save their king and kingdom, or they would likely be dead themselves, branded as traitors who had attempted to harm the beloved queen. The stakes could not be higher, and there would be no second chances if their plan failed. The dawn operation began exactly as planned, with Sir Thomas positioning himself outside King Edward's chambers, while Marcus and his team moved toward the secret room. The castle was still quiet, with only a few early rising servants beginning their daily routines. Marcus felt his heartbeat echoing in his ears as they navigated the hidden passages that would lead them to Queen Camilla's concealed chamber. When they reached the secret room, Marcus was relieved to find it empty. The queen had apparently not felt the need to post guards, confident that her activities remained undiscovered. The chamber looked exactly as it had the night before, with maps and documents spread across tables and correspondence stacked in careful piles. Marcus and his companions immediately began gathering everything they could find, working quickly but carefully to ensure they collected all the evidence. The documents were even more damaging than Marcus had hoped. They found detailed correspondence between Queen Camilla and Lord Aldrich of Valdoria, spanning nearly 2 years and outlining the entire conspiracy from its earliest stages. The letters revealed that Camilla had been recruited and trained specifically for this mission. Her marriage to King Edward carefully orchestrated as part of a long-term plan to conquer the kingdom from within. Among the most shocking discoveries were detailed maps of the castle's defenses, including guard rotations, weapon stores, and strategic weak points that could be exploited during an invasion. There were also lists of nobles and officials who had been identified as potential collaborators or threats, with notes about how each should be handled when the time came for Valdoria to take control. Marcus found a journal written in Queen Camilla's own hand that documented her activities and thoughts throughout the conspiracy. The entries revealed a cold, calculating mind focused entirely on her mission, with no trace of genuine affection for King Edward or concern for the people she was betraying. She wrote about the king's kindness and trust as weaknesses to be exploited, and described her fellow conspirators with the detached professionalism of a military commander. While Marcus and his team gathered evidence, Sir Thomas was facing his own challenges at the king's chambers. King Edward had awakened feeling particularly unwell, complaining of severe weakness and difficulty breathing. When Queen Camilla arrived with his morning meal, Sir Thomas politely but firmly insisted that the king should eat in the Great Hall with other members of the court, citing new security protocols that required the royal family to maintain public visibility during uncertain times. Queen Camilla's reaction to this suggestion was telling. For just a moment her composed mask slipped, and Sir Thomas saw a flash of anger and calculation in her eyes before she regained her composure. She argued that the king was too unwell to appear in public, and that he needed rest and privacy to recover from his illness. Her insistence on bringing him his meal personally suddenly seemed much more sinister in light of what they now knew. Sir Thomas stood his ground, explaining that the security measures were not negotiable, and that the king's physician had recommended increased activity to help with his recovery. King Edward, despite his weakness, seemed curious about these new protocols and agreed to join the court for breakfast. Queen Camilla had no choice but to accept this arrangement, though Sir Thomas noticed how carefully she watched him throughout the exchange. Back in the secret chamber, Marcus made another disturbing discovery. Hidden beneath other documents, he found a detailed timeline for the final phase of the conspiracy. According to the plan, King Edward was supposed to die within the next 3 days, during a feast that Queen Camilla had organized to celebrate their wedding anniversary. The poison would be administered during the public celebration, making his death appear natural and tragic, while providing Queen Camilla with the perfect opportunity to display her grief and devotion. The timeline also revealed that Valdorian forces were already positioning themselves near the kingdom's borders. ready to move as soon as news of the king's death reached them. The invasion would begin under the pretense of offering support to the grieving queen and helping to maintain stability during the transition of power. By the time anyone realized what was happening, it would be too late to mount an effective defense. Marcus and his team had gathered all the evidence they could carry when they heard footsteps in the hidden passage outside the chamber. They quickly extinguished the candles and pressed themselves against the walls, weapons ready as someone approached the secret room. The footsteps paused outside the entrance, and Marcus held his breath, wondering if they had been discovered. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps continued past the chamber and faded into the distance. Marcus realized that one of Queen Camilla's servants or allies must have been making routine rounds, checking on various locations throughout the castle. This close call reminded them all of how dangerous their situation remained. Even with the evidence they had gathered, they made their way back through the hidden passages, taking a different route to avoid whoever had been patrolling the area. When they finally reached the armory where they had planned to meet, Marcus felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. They now had everything they needed to expose Queen Camilla's treachery, but the most difficult part of their mission still lay ahead. Sir Thomas was waiting for them with additional news that complicated their situation. During breakfast in the Great Hall, he had observed Queen Camilla carefully, noting how she interacted with various nobles and officials. Her behavior suggested that she suspected something was wrong, though she couldn't be sure what had changed or how much they knew about her activities. More concerning was Sir Thomas's observation that Queen Camilla had spent considerable time speaking quietly with Lord William, the kingdom's treasurer, and Sir Geoffrey, the captain of the castle guard. Both men held positions that would be crucial if she needed to accelerate her plans or defend against accusations. Sir Thomas suspected that she was either recruiting additional allies or preparing contingency plans in case her primary strategy failed. The group spread all the evidence they had collected across the armory's large table, organizing it to present the clearest possible picture of the conspiracy. The sheer volume of documentation was overwhelming, but it also provided undeniable proof of Queen Camilla's guilt. Letters, maps, timelines, poison supplies, and her personal journal all combined to reveal the full scope of her betrayal. Marcus realized that they now faced a crucial decision about how to proceed. They could present their evidence directly to King Edward, but his current weakened state might make it difficult for him to process the full implications of what they had discovered. They could also approach other trusted nobles or officials, but they needed to be careful about who they chose, given the possibility that Queen Camilla had already recruited additional allies. Time was running short, and they all understood that Queen Camilla would not remain unaware of their activities for much longer. Her suspicious behavior at breakfast suggested that she was already beginning to suspect that her secrets had been discovered. If she decided to accelerate her timeline or attempt to escape, they would need to be ready to act immediately to prevent her from succeeding. The decision to confront King Edward directly came when Sir Thomas received an urgent message that the king had suddenly taken a turn for the worse. Queen Camilla had convinced the royal physician that His Majesty needed immediate rest and had ordered everyone except herself and the medical staff to leave his chambers. Marcus and Sir Thomas exchanged worried glances, realizing that she might be attempting to administer the final dose of poison ahead of schedule. They gathered the most crucial pieces of evidence and rushed to the king's chambers, where they found Queen Camilla sitting beside her husband's bed, with a cup of herbal tea in her hands. She looked up with apparent surprise when they entered, explaining that she was trying to help the king feel better with a special remedy she had prepared. The innocent scene would have been touching if they hadn't known the truth about what was really in that cup. Sir Thomas stepped forward with respectful but firm authority, addressing King Edward directly despite Queen Camilla's protests. He explained that they had discovered evidence of a serious threat to His Majesty's safety and requested permission to present their findings immediately. King Edward, despite his weakness, was still sharp enough to recognize the urgency in Sir Thomas's voice and granted his request. Marcus carefully laid out the evidence they had gathered, starting with the poison samples and working through the correspondence with Valdoria. King Edward's expression changed from confusion to disbelief to horrified understanding as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. Queen Camilla maintained her composure throughout most of the presentation, occasionally expressing shock and concern, but Marcus could see the calculation behind her eyes as she searched for a way to escape or discredit their accusations. When Marcus presented her personal journal, Queen Camilla's mask finally slipped completely. She stopped pretending to be surprised or hurt by the accusations and instead began to defend her actions with cold logic. She argued that King Edward was weak and that the kingdom needed stronger leadership to survive in an increasingly dangerous world. Her alliance with Valdoria, she claimed, would bring prosperity and security that the current government could never provide. King Edward listened to his wife's words with growing heartbreak and anger. The woman he had loved and trusted completely had been systematically destroying everything he held dear while pretending to care for him. The betrayal was so complete and devastating that for several minutes he couldn't speak, simply staring at the evidence spread before him as the reality of his situation sank in. Queen Camilla continued her defense, becoming more desperate as she realized that her careful plans were crumbling around her. She revealed additional details about the conspiracy in her attempts to justify her actions, inadvertently providing even more evidence against herself. She spoke about other nobles who had expressed dissatisfaction with King Edward's rule, and suggested that her actions had support among the people, though Marcus suspected she was exaggerating to make her position seem stronger. The confrontation was interrupted when Lord William, the treasurer, arrived at the chambers accompanied by several guards. Queen Camilla's face brightened momentarily, as if she expected support from this quarter. But her expression quickly changed when Lord William announced that he had come to place her under arrest. He explained that Sir Thomas had briefed him on the situation and that he had spent the morning verifying some of the financial evidence they had discovered. William revealed that Queen Camilla had been secretly moving funds from the royal treasury to accounts controlled by Valdorian agents, weakening the kingdom's ability to maintain its defenses, while simultaneously financing her own conspiracy. The financial records confirmed the timeline Marcus had found in her secret chamber and provided additional proof of the planned invasion scope and timing. Queen Camilla made one final attempt to regain control of the situation, claiming that she had been coerced into her actions and that her life had been threatened if she didn't comply with Valdoria's demands. She wept convincingly and appealed to King Edward's love for her, begging him to believe that she had only wanted to protect him and the kingdom. For a moment, Marcus worried that her performance might be effective, as King Edward had always been susceptible to her charms. However, the evidence was too overwhelming and the betrayal too complete for even King Edward's love to overcome. He ordered Queen Camilla to be taken into custody immediately, his voice breaking with emotion as he pronounced the words that ended their marriage and sealed her fate. The woman who had shared his bed and his secrets would now face trial for treason, and if convicted, the penalty would almost certainly be death. As the guards escorted Queen Camilla from the chamber, she turned back one final time to look at King Edward. The mask of loving devotion was completely gone now, replaced by cold hatred that chilled Marcus to the bone. She spoke no words, but her expression promised that this confrontation was not the end of the story, that somehow she would find a way to complete her mission, or at least ensure that everyone involved in her downfall would pay a heavy price. With Queen Camilla in custody, attention turned immediately to the broader conspiracy and the imminent threat from Valdoria. Marcus and Sir Thomas briefed King Edward on everything they had learned about the planned invasion, including the positioning of enemy forces and the timeline for their attack. Despite his physical weakness from the prolonged poisoning, King Edward's mind was clear and focused as he began issuing orders to prepare the kingdom's defenses. The first priority was to identify and neutralize any remaining conspirators within the castle and the broader government. The documents from Queen Camilla's secret chamber provided names and details about other individuals who had been compromised or recruited, and search parties were immediately dispatched to apprehend these suspects before they could escape or cause additional damage. Sir Thomas was placed in charge of reviewing and strengthening the castle's security protocols, while Marcus was assigned to lead a team that would investigate the extent of Valdoria's intelligence gathering and sabotage efforts. They needed to understand exactly how much sensitive information had been compromised and what steps would be necessary to protect against the planned invasion. King Edward also sent urgent messages to allied kingdoms and regional lords, warning them about the conspiracy and requesting assistance in defending against Valdorian aggression. The political implications of Queen Camilla's betrayal extended far beyond their own borders, as other rulers would need to be alert to similar infiltration attempts and foreign manipulation. As the day progressed, Marcus felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. They had successfully exposed the conspiracy and prevented King Edward's assassination, but the threat to the kingdom was far from over. Valdorian forces were still positioned near their borders, and with their original plan exposed, they might decide to launch their invasion earlier than planned rather than abandon their objectives entirely. The next few days would be crucial in determining whether the kingdom could survive this crisis and emerge stronger, or whether Queen Camilla's conspiracy would ultimately succeed despite her capture. Marcus knew that his role in uncovering the plot had changed his life forever, and that the responsibilities he now carried were far greater than those of a simple royal guard. The investigation that followed Queen Camilla's arrest revealed the conspiracy was even more extensive than Marcus and Sir Thomas had initially discovered. Within hours of beginning their search for additional conspirators, they uncovered a network of spies and collaborators that reached into every level of the kingdom's government. Servants, minor nobles, merchants, and even some members of the royal council had been compromised through various combinations of bribery, blackmail, and ideological persuasion. Marcus found himself at the center of these investigations, his keen observational skills and intimate knowledge of the castle's daily operations, making him invaluable in identifying suspicious activities and connections. King Edward, despite his ongoing recovery from the poison's effects, insisted on personally reviewing every piece of evidence and participating in decisions about how to handle each discovered conspirator. The most shocking revelation came when they learned that Sir Geoffrey, the captain of the castle guard, had been secretly working with Queen Camilla for over a year. His position had given him access to detailed information about the kingdom's military capabilities and defensive strategies, all of which had been systematically passed to Valdorian intelligence agents. The discovery explained how Queen Camilla had been able to operate so freely within the castle and why her secret meetings had never been detected by normal security protocols. Sir Geoffrey's arrest created immediate challenges for the castle's defense, as many of the existing guard rotations and security procedures had been compromised. Sir Thomas was forced to quickly reorganize the entire guard structure, promoting loyal junior officers and bringing in trusted soldiers from outlying garrisons to fill critical positions. Marcus found himself elevated to a position of significant responsibility, overseeing security for the royal quarters while Sir Thomas managed the broader reorganization efforts. The financial investigation led by Lord William revealed that the conspiracy had been draining resources from the kingdom for months. Funds that should have been used for military preparations and infrastructure maintenance had been redirected to Valdorian accounts, leaving the kingdom's defenses weaker than anyone had realized. Emergency measures were implemented to secure remaining treasury assets and begin the process of rebuilding the kingdom's financial reserves. Meanwhile, intelligence reports confirmed that Valdorian forces were indeed massing near the border, apparently preparing for an invasion that had been planned to coincide with King Edward's expected death. Scouts reported unusual military activity in 3 separate border regions, suggesting a coordinated attack designed to overwhelm the kingdom's defenses through multiple simultaneous assaults. King Edward's response to these threats demonstrated the strength and wisdom that had made him a beloved ruler. Despite his physical weakness from the prolonged poisoning, he threw himself into the task of organizing the kingdom's defense with remarkable energy and focus. He sent emissaries to allied kingdoms requesting immediate military assistance, while simultaneously mobilizing every available resource within his own borders. The king also made a decision that surprised many of his advisors by ordering Queen Camilla to be brought before the full royal council for a public confession. He believed that allowing her to present her own version of events would help identify any remaining conspirators, while also demonstrating to the people that justice was being served fairly and transparently. Marcus was assigned to escort Queen Camilla to this crucial meeting, a responsibility that made him deeply uncomfortable given her intelligence and manipulative abilities. Queen Camilla's appearance before the royal council was a masterful performance that reminded everyone why she had been so successful in her deception She presented herself as a victim of Valdorian coercion, claiming that threats against her family had forced her to cooperate with the conspiracy against her will. Her story was carefully constructed to explain many of the discovered facts while positioning herself as someone who had tried to minimize the damage while protecting innocent people. Several council members seemed sympathetic to her account, particularly those who had developed personal relationships with her during her time as queen. Marcus watched with growing concern as Queen Camilla skillfully played on these emotional connections, using her charm and apparent vulnerability to create doubt about her true motivations. He realized that even with overwhelming evidence, her intelligence and persuasive abilities made her dangerous even while in custody. The turning point came when Marcus was called upon to testify about what he had witnessed during his infiltration of her secret meeting. His detailed account of Queen Camilla's casual discussion of King Edward's planned murder and her obvious leadership role in the conspiracy provided the emotional impact needed to overcome any lingering sympathy for her position. When he described how she had handed him additional poison with instructions for its use, several council members visibly recoiled from her presence. Queen Camilla's composure finally cracked when confronted with this testimony. She abandoned her victim narrative and instead launched into a passionate defense of Valdorian superiority and criticism of King Edward's leadership. Her words revealed the depth of her contempt for the kingdom she had pretended to serve, and the calculated nature of her betrayal. Any remaining doubts about her guilt were eliminated by her own angry admissions. The council's verdict was unanimous, and Queen Camilla was sentenced to death for high treason. However, King Edward surprised everyone by announcing that the execution would be delayed until after the expected Valdorian invasion had been repelled. He explained that keeping her alive might provide opportunities to gather additional intelligence about enemy plans, and that her eventual public execution would serve as a powerful symbol of the kingdom's strength and justice. Marcus understood the strategic wisdom of this decision, but he also worried about the risks involved in keeping such a dangerous prisoner alive. Queen Camilla had already demonstrated remarkable resourcefulness and intelligence, and he suspected that she would use any additional time to attempt escape or find ways to complete her mission. The security arrangements for her imprisonment would need to be extraordinary to prevent her from causing further damage. As preparations for the kingdom's defense intensified, Marcus found himself working closely with King Edward on intelligence analysis and strategic planning. The king had recognized his unique combination of observational skills, practical knowledge, and proven loyalty, elevating him to a position of trust that would have been unimaginable just weeks earlier. The simple royal guard who had started this journey was now playing a crucial role in determining his homeland's fate, though irony was not lost on Marcus that Queen Camilla's conspiracy had ultimately strengthened the kingdom in some important ways. The exposure of the spy network had led to a thorough security overhaul that made the government more resistant to future infiltration. The financial irregularities had prompted reforms that would improve long-term economic stability. Most importantly, the crisis had unified nobles and commoners alike in their determination to defend their homeland against foreign aggression. However, the immediate challenges remained daunting. Valdorian forces were larger and better equipped than the kingdom's military, and the conspiracy had weakened critical defenses at the worst possible time. The success of their resistance would depend on the courage and determination of people like Marcus, who had chosen loyalty and duty over personal safety when the kingdom's survival hung in the balance. The Valdorian invasion began 3 days earlier than expected, catching the kingdom's forces in the middle of their defensive preparations. Marcus was awakened before dawn by the sound of warning bells echoing across the countryside, signaling that enemy forces had crossed the border at multiple points simultaneously. As he rushed to his assigned position in the castle's command center, he realized that Queen Camilla's conspiracy had succeeded in one crucial way. The invasion was happening during a period of maximum vulnerability for the kingdom's defenses. King Edward, despite his ongoing recovery from the poisoning, had insisted on personally directing the defense efforts. Marcus found him in the castle's war room, surrounded by maps and messengers, his face pale but his mind clearly focused on the enormous task ahead. The reports coming in from border garrisons painted a grim picture of coordinated attacks designed to overwhelm the kingdom's ability to respond effectively. The Valdorian strategy was exactly what Queen Camilla's documents had predicted: simultaneous assaults on 3 major border fortresses, accompanied by smaller raids designed to disrupt communication and prevent the coordination of defensive efforts. The enemy forces were larger and better equipped than intelligence estimates had suggested, confirming that the conspiracy had provided them with detailed information about the kingdom's military capabilities and limitations. Marcus's new role placed him at the center of the intelligence gathering and analysis efforts that would be crucial to the kingdom's survival. He coordinated reports from scouts and garrison commanders, helping King Edward and the military leadership understand the scope and direction of the Valdorian advance. The information painted an increasingly desperate picture as the morning progressed. The eastern fortress of Millbrook had fallen within the first few hours of fighting, its garrison overwhelmed by a force 3 times larger than expected. The central garrison at Oakenholt was under siege but still holding, though reports suggested they wouldn't be able to resist much longer without reinforcement. Only the western fortress at Greystone appeared to be successfully repelling its attackers, thanks to advance warning that had allowed them to prepare more effectively. As the day continued, it became clear that the Valdorian forces were advancing toward the capital with shocking speed. Their knowledge of the kingdom's road networks and defensive positions, undoubtedly provided by Queen Camilla's spy network, allowed them to avoid most of the obstacles that should have slowed their progress. Marcus realized that the battle for the kingdom would likely be decided within the next few days, possibly at the castle itself. King Edward made the difficult decision to abandon the outlying garrisons that couldn't be effectively reinforced and concentrate all available forces around the capital. This strategic withdrawal would save lives and resources that would be needed for the final defense, but it also meant sacrificing territory and allowing the enemy to advance closer to the heart of the kingdom. Marcus watched the king struggle with these choices, knowing that every decision could determine whether his people lived or died. The arrival of reinforcements from allied kingdoms provided the first hopeful news of the day. Lord Aldrich of Westmarch had responded to King Edward's plea for assistance by sending a substantial force of cavalry and archers, while the northern kingdom of Ravenshollow had contributed a company of elite soldiers skilled in defensive warfare. These additional troops wouldn't be enough to match Valdorian numbers, but they would provide crucial expertise and morale support for the coming battle. Marcus found himself assigned to coordinate the integration of these allied forces with the kingdom's own military units. The task required careful attention to communication, supply, and tactical coordination, all while working under the pressure of an approaching enemy army. He discovered that his years of observing and understanding the complex dynamics within the castle had prepared him well for managing these military relationships. Late in the afternoon, an unexpected opportunity presented itself when a group of Valdorian scouts was captured attempting to infiltrate the capital's outer defenses. Under interrogation, they revealed that Queen Camilla's capture had indeed disrupted the invasion timeline and caused confusion within the enemy command structure. The Valdorian forces were advancing more quickly than originally planned because they feared that their intelligence advantages would be lost if they delayed. This information suggested that the enemy might be vulnerable to strategic deception and misdirection. King Edward authorized Marcus to develop a plan that would exploit Queen Camilla's continued imprisonment to confuse and mislead the approaching Valdorian forces. The idea was risky, but offered the possibility of gaining tactical advantages that could offset the kingdom's numerical disadvantages. Marcus proposed using Queen Camilla herself as an unwitting participant in their deception. They would allow carefully selected information to reach Valdorian intelligence agents, suggesting that she had escaped custody and was providing updated intelligence about the kingdom's defensive preparations. This false information would include misleading details about troop positions, supply routes, and strategic plans designed to draw enemy forces into vulnerable positions. The plan required Queen Camilla to be moved from her secure prison cell to a more visible location, where enemy agents might observe her presence and assume she was active in supporting their invasion. Marcus volunteered to oversee this dangerous operation, knowing that any mistake could result in her actual escape or provide her with opportunities to sabotage their defensive efforts. The deception proved more successful than anyone had dared hope. Valdorian forces adjusted their approach based on the false intelligence, concentrating their attacks on heavily defended positions while leaving their flanks exposed to counterattack. The kingdom's forces were able to inflict significant casualties and slow the enemy advance, buying precious time for additional preparations and the arrival of more allied reinforcements. As night fell on the second day of the invasion, Marcus stood on the castle's highest tower, looking out over a landscape illuminated by the fires of war. Valdorian campfires stretched across the horizon, a reminder of the overwhelming force arrayed against them, but the kingdom's defenses had held longer than anyone had expected. The bravery of common soldiers and the wisdom of King Edward's leadership had given them a fighting chance against impossible odds. The final battle would come with the dawn, and Marcus knew that everything they had worked for would be decided in the next few hours. Queen Camilla's conspiracy had brought their kingdom to the brink of destruction, but the courage and determination of people like Sir Thomas, Lord William, and countless unnamed soldiers had created an opportunity for survival and victory. As Marcus prepared for what might be his last night alive, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. A simple royal guard's observations had uncovered a conspiracy that threatened everything he held dear. But the real victory had come from the choices made by ordinary people, who chose duty and honor over personal safety, whether they survived the coming battle or not. They had proven that the values Queen Camilla had tried to destroy were stronger than the forces arrayed against them. The kingdom's fate would soon be decided, but Marcus knew that they had already won the most important battle by refusing to surrender their principles in the face of betrayal and overwhelming odds. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it with the courage and unity that had always made their homeland worth defending.